The neighborhood had always seemed calm on the surface, but underneath the manicured lawns and polished driveways, drama simmered quietly. Homeowners associations had a way of creating an illusion of order, while in reality, there was always at least one person pulling strings for their own benefit. In this community, that person was Karen, the HOA president. She was known for her constant surveillance, her strict interpretation of the rules, and her uncanny ability to insert herself into everyone's business. I had been away from my house for several months. Work had taken me across the country, and during that time, I left the property locked and secured. My absence wasn't a secret, but I hadn't announced it either. To me, it was just a normal break, a temporary relocation. I trusted that my home would stay just as I left it. But as soon as I returned earlier than planned, something felt off. The driveway had unfamiliar tire marks. The grass, usually trimmed, looked like someone else had been maintaining it, but not in the precise way I had always preferred. Curtains I never closed were drawn shut, and lights were on in the living room, even though I had left every switch turned off. Stepping out of the car, I noticed a pair of shoes near the front door. They weren't mine. My heart sank as realization struck. Someone had been living in my home. I quickly entered with my spare key, and the sight nearly floored me. The house wasn't in shambles, but it carried clear signs of someone else's presence. Empty soda cans sat on the counter. A gaming console, which I had never owned, was plugged into my television. Clothes that didn't belong to me were draped over the couch. It felt like I had walked into a stranger's apartment, not my own home. And that's when I saw him, Karen's son. He was a child, but a grown man in his 20s, lounging as if he owned the place. He looked startled, but instead of apologizing or leaving, he smirked with the kind of entitlement only someone like Karen could have raised. As I stood there in shock, Karen appeared within minutes. She must have seen me pull in and rushed over, clearly panicked. She began insisting that there had been a misunderstanding, that her son had only been looking after the property. But the way the house had been claimed, decorated, and practically transformed told a very different story. This wasn't babysitting a house. This was moving in, full scale. When I demanded an explanation, Karen's demeanor shifted instantly. She tried to assert authority, claiming that since the HOA had noticed my extended absence, they had a responsibility to ensure the property was being maintained. She twisted her words carefully, making it sound like she had done me a favor. But the truth was undeniable. Her son had been living like it was his home, without permission, without rent, and without shame. The confrontation escalated quickly. Karen grew visibly agitated, her voice raising, her hands waving. Then, in true HOA fashion, she made the boldest move yet. She called the cops. She was panicking, pretending as if I was the intruder in my own house. As I stood there, stunned, waiting for the officers to arrive, I realized this was only the beginning. Karen had drawn a line in the sand, and her son's invasion of my property was only part of a much bigger scheme. The officers hadn't yet arrived, but the stage was already set for a storm that would sweep through the entire neighborhood. What Karen didn't realize was that I had returned earlier than expected, and I wasn't going to let this go quietly. The sound of approaching sirens broke the uneasy silence that lingered after Karen's frantic phone call. She stood near the doorway, arms crossed, her face tense with anticipation. To anyone watching, she wanted it to look like she was in control, like she was the victim. But the truth was plain as day inside those four walls. Her son had turned my home into his personal hangout spot, and now she was trying to rewrite reality before the authorities arrived. The patrol car pulled up, its lights casting blue and red streaks across the street. Neighbors peeked out from behind their blinds, already eager to watch another HOA spectacle unfold. In this community, gossip traveled faster than any emergency vehicle, and Karen had provided the perfect show. When the officers stepped inside, Karen immediately launched into her version of events. She pointed at me, raising her voice, insisting I was trespassing. She claimed I had left my home abandoned for months, and that in my absence, the HOA had taken steps to protect it. According to her, her son was merely acting as a caretaker, ensuring the property didn't fall into disrepair. Her son, standing smugly in the corner, nodded along, pretending he had been doing me a service. The officers listened quietly, scribbling notes, but their eyes shifted toward me, waiting for my side of the story. I calmly handed over proof of ownership, deed documents, my driver's license with a matching address, and photos of how I had left the house. Everything lined up perfectly. The more evidence I produced, the more Karen's face tightened. She had built her story on a shaky foundation, and it was crumbling under the weight of facts. The officers turned their attention to her son. They asked the simple question, had he been given written permission to stay here? Of course he hadn't. He fumbled for excuses, trying to lean on his mother's position in the HOA. But the law didn't care about Karen's self-appointed authority. The house was mine, and he had no legal right to be inside it. Still, Karen wasn't ready to let go. She grew louder, angrier, her panic bleeding through every word. She accused me of neglect, of endangering the neighborhood by leaving a vacant property. She tried to frame me as irresponsible, the kind of homeowner who needed HOA supervision. But all the while, the evidence spoke louder than her voice. The officers gave her son a clear warning. He was to pack up his belongings and vacate immediately. Any further attempt to enter without permission would result in trespassing charges. Karen tried to argue, but the officers shut her down. Her authority ended at HOA bylaws, not state law. Watching her son carry out bags of clothes, electronics, and even kitchen items that weren't his, I felt a mix of anger and disbelief. He had acted like my home was his personal apartment, and Karen had enabled it every step of the way. The gall of it all was staggering. But even as he left, Karen's eyes burned with resentment. This wasn't over. I could see in the way she glared at me, the way her lips curled with unspoken threats. For someone like Karen, being challenged wasn't just about one incident. It was a declaration of war. That night, after the police cars drove away and the neighborhood grew quiet again, I sat in my living room surrounded by the remnants of someone else's life. It felt surreal, as if I was a guest in my own house. The scent of someone else's cologne still lingered in the air, and the faint hum of electronics I had installed filled the silence. Karen's son might have been forced out, but the real battle was just beginning. Karen wasn't the type to back down, not when she felt humiliated. She had called the cops to intimidate me, and it had backfired spectacularly. Now, I was certain she would try something even bigger to regain control. And deep down, I knew one thing for certain. The next move she made would shake the entire neighborhood. The days following the police incident were eerily quiet, almost too quiet. For a moment, I thought Karen might have retreated, licking her wounds after her public humiliation. But anyone who knew her understood she wasn't the type to let things go. When Karen lost, she didn't accept defeat, she plotted. It started subtly. Notices began appearing in my mailbox, stamped with the HOA logo. Each one listed minor violations of community rules. My grass was allegedly too long, my garbage bins weren't positioned properly, my porch light was too bright. None of it was true, and all of it was petty. But Karen was methodical, layering complaint after complaint, hoping to bury me in HOA red tape. At first, I ignored them, chalking it up to her bitterness. But then came the fines. Ridiculous amounts for fabricated violations, each one signed off by the HOA president herself. Karen was wielding her position like a weapon, trying to drain my patience and my wallet until I gave up and left. The neighbors noticed too. Whispers spread to the cul-de-sac about the spectacle. Some supported me quietly, shaking their heads at Karen's antics. Others, afraid of her retaliation, stayed silent. Her son, meanwhile, lingered in the neighborhood like a shadow, circling past my property, glaring, as if daring me to challenge him again. But what Karen didn't anticipate was that I kept records. Every letter, every notice, every unreasonable fine, I documented it all. And as she escalated, her pattern became undeniable. This wasn't rule enforcement. It was targeted harassment. The breaking point came when she tried to stage a full-blown HOA meeting about my property. She gathered a board, plastered accusations on the agenda, and painted me as a reckless homeowner bringing down the community's value. But this time, I came prepared. When the meeting began, Karen launched into her performance. She listed every supposed violation, her voice dripping with satisfaction as she tried to rally the board against me. But when it was my turn, I laid out the truth. I presented the police report from a night she had called them, proof of her son's unlawful occupation of my home. I spread out every baseless notice she had sent me, each one documented and debunked. And then I revealed something that left the entire room stunned. I had contacted an attorney who confirmed that her actions weren't just unfair, they bordered on a legal abuse of power. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Karen's smugness evaporated. For the first time, her authority was questioned not by a frustrated neighbor, but by her own peers. They saw the liability she had created, the danger she posed to the HOA itself. Her son, who had been lurking in the back, looked ready to explode, but there was nothing he could do. The board moved quickly, stripping Karen of her position as HOA president. Effective immediately, she was no longer in charge. The fallout was swift. The fines were dismissed. The harassment stopped. And Karen, once the queen of the cul-de-sac, was reduced to just another homeowner with no more power than anyone else. As for me, I finally reclaimed my home, not just physically, but in spirit. The unwanted reminders of her son's invasion were gone. The air cleared of her shadow. I could walk through my rooms without the weight of someone else's presence pressing on me. The neighborhood settled back into its carefully curated calm, but this time, without Karen watching from behind her blinds, waiting to pounce. She still lived there, of course, but her reign was over. People stopped fearing her, and slowly, they started talking openly about the years of intimidation they had endured under her leadership. Karen had called the cops in a panic, hoping to flip the script and paint me as the intruder. But in the end, her desperation exposed her for what she truly was, a bully clinging to power. And when the truth finally came out, she lost everything she had fought to protect. What began as a shocking discovery when I returned early had turned into the undoing of the most feared figure in the neighborhood. And for the first time in years, the community finally felt like a place where people could breathe.